His too. Well, this morning, as some of you may know, Ilo and I met our speaker, Amanda Kabage. I checked on the pronunciation. While we were waiting for a bus to the state fair. And on the way, we got to talking, and when I heard her story of where she worked and why, I realized she had a great story to tell, along with a lot of useful information. And lucky for us, she agreed to come and speak to us. And quite incidentally, it is in December, the Disease Prevention and Treatment Month. I didn't even know there was such a thing, actually. I don't want to steal her thunder, so I'll just say that Amanda's undergraduate studies focused on biology and ethics. She went on to receive a Master of Science in Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy with a minor in Bioethics. She then worked in Pediatric Epidemiology at the University of Minnesota for 8 years, studying the genetics of pediatric cancer. Then in 2014, she joined the Microbiota, did I pronounce that right? Okay. Microbiota Research and Therapeutics team. As you will find out, it was a no-brainer for her to join this team. When Amanda's not working, she enjoys traveling and has visited over 30 countries and most states in the United States. She also enjoys lifting weights and running, reading history of science books, seeing live music, dining at all the restaurants around town, and hanging with her dogs, Rocky and Wally. So we are delighted to have you here today, Amanda. Now you can fill in what I left out.
Well, I am very excited. I love coming and talking to groups. So as Peggy noted, so I work at the University of Minnesota, and I'm reaching 16 years of full-time research at the university. And again, my background was in genetics and pediatric cancer. So I switched over to the field of microbiome-based research, and whenever I do talks, I always kind of like to get a little bit of a sense of people's knowledge, so I know how to kind of cater my talks. So I'm going to first kind of ask, like, who is kind of aware of the gut microbiome? Everybody familiar? Okay. Who's heard of C. difficile infection, or C. diff for short? Okay. So those are two really important factors for my story. In 2012, I started developing some some GI issues, some gastrointestinal issues, and due to some kind of very unique symptoms that I was having, I didn't really fit the profile of certain disease patients, and so I got kind of misdiagnosed, not improperly by doctors, but just by circumstance. And unfortunately, what led to a 14-month-long endeavor of battling C. difficile infection, which is this little guy right here, it led me to a new career path. So I'll first tell you like what C. diff is. C. diff is a bacterial infection that attacks your intestines. I always like to kind of describe it as, we've all heard of E. coli, we're very familiar with that. It's like E. coli on steroids. It's significantly worse. The way we describe it is that C. diff will just throw a nuclear bomb on your intestines. It just like wreaks havoc, it destroys your intestines very badly. About 500,000, about 500,000 Americans get C. diff infections every single year. And about 20% of those people end up like patients like me who don't respond to traditional therapies. Traditional therapies are antibiotics to treat this. And this is one of those bugs that's kind of a super bug. The CDC, the World Health Organization, a lot of health organizations are very concerned about C. diff because it's not responding to antibiotics. It's becoming resistant to antibiotic treatment. So in 2012, when I got sick, I was one of those 20% of patients. I think the numbers actually increased to about 30% of that 500,000 no longer respond to antibiotics. So my infection just kept coming back. I'd be treated with antibiotics, it would return. I'd get sick, get treated, return. what C. diff is these toxins that are produced in your intestines to cause inflammation, ulcerations, damage. About 30,000 Americans still to this day die every year of C. difficile infection. It can cause your intestine to actually essentially explode, getting your intestinal fluids into your body, which can cause septic shock, and people can die of that. Also, it just can kill people because of the massive amount of malnutrition and other issues that come with the disease itself. So it's notoriously known as a disease of diarrhea. When I was at the peak of my illness, I would go 20 to 30 times a day. And this is every single day, where you can't even get in your car for a 15-minute drive because you're worried about whether you have to go to a bathroom. And so C. diff patients are always thinking, where's the next bathroom? It's very quick, it's rapid, you have no time, and so you are debilitated. I started losing my hair, I lost 20 pounds. I was now no longer eating solid food because the process of breaking down food was so painful that I was stuck to liquid diets. So for 14 months I suffered with this, and nothing was working, and thankfully being a researcher at the time, I started stumbling across some papers about the gut microbiome and about this treatment that always raises some eyebrows, called fecal microbiota transplant. And being a researcher already, dug in, and I'm like, okay, so our gut microbiome is essentially a new organ, or we consider it an organ. We have trillions of microbes in our large intestine. They've evolved along with us through our entire life, and so they're integral to our health. We've always known that they've existed, but we've never really understood their role in human health. But back when I got sick was right when researchers were starting to kind of dig into these microbes, trying to understand really what role they played. And I was really lucky when I started digging into the little research at the time that was being done on C. diff and these fecal microbiota transplants. Because the only person in the entire United States that was FDA approved to do these kind of transplants and this research was a doctor at the University of Minnesota. So I thought, what luck. Where I work is the only doctor in the entire United States that does this. So I reached out to him directly and told him my story, and I was not the very first person to ever do this to him. And he immediately met with me and said, okay, let's try one last course of antibiotics, make sure we've exhausted all options. And if that doesn't work, then we'll move on to these transplants. I think you're a good candidate. So of course I went on antibiotics, it failed, didn't work, and I was ready for my transplant. So September of 2013, this was the early days of fecal microbiota transplant. It is kind of what it sounds like. It's taking human stool and transplanting it into a patient's colon. So at that time, so you take a healthy individual that has a lot of these healthy microbes, and you're transplanting it into a C. diff patient. When I noted that it's kind of like a nuclear bomb in your system, what C. diff will do is those trillions of microbes are decimated to the point that there's essentially nothing left. These healthy microbes have been just completely killed off. I like to think about the microbiome and talk about it as like an ecosystem. So I think of like a rainforest, and so you think of like one or two species kind of dying off. Okay, your rainforest can still kind of function, but it's not perfect. But eventually you think about just massive devastation that can never be fixed again. And that's what C. diff does to the gut. So I essentially had no microbiome left. My immune system, my little bugs in my gut were all like killed off. So I needed healthy microbes implanted back into me. So in the early days, it was more, we didn't have these wonderful capsules that my team has created. And so it was done in kind of a very raw form. They did have a stool donor program, like blood donation, except people who donate stool. It's actually incredibly difficult to qualify as a stool donor. I think about 5% of people who even express interest in becoming a stool donor in our program actually qualify. So these are the healthiest people on the planet. I don't think I can meet a healthier person in my life than our stool donors. Back then, they would only do these via colonoscopy, because we would have just essentially kind of raw stool mixed with saline, and then it would just go into the colonoscopy tube, and then those microbes were implanted directly into the intestine. I already had 4 or 5 colonoscopies during these 14 months I was sick because, again, there was so much damage to my intestine that they had to constantly keep doing colonoscopies on me to check the health of my colon. So I had my transplant, and I kid you not, within like a day or 2, I could tell it was like working. And as Peggy noted, like, I'm a runner, I'm active, I travel all over the world, and I mean, all of that had been put on hold in my life for these 14 months I was sick. So my transplant worked. It was about 2 months later, I was completely back at the gym. I bought my first airline ticket in a year and a half and got on a plane and started traveling and hit the ground running. So Alexander Khoruts was the physician who treated me, and we, of course, then, after the success, looked at each other and said, we should probably be working together. I'm already a researcher at the U. I had, was one of his kind of first patients getting this procedure. A lot of people have that kind of ick factor with what this treatment is, but to me, I just wanted to be better. Knowing that this could have killed me, knowing how it had debilitated my life, I didn't care what the treatment was. If it was going to work, you could put human stool inside my colon. So it did work, and so I joined his team about 6 months later. And so since 2014, I've been working alongside Dr. Khoruts and building the Microbiota Therapeutics and research team at the University of Minnesota. What's really exciting about the work that we do is it started with a lot of GI diseases. It started with C. diff. This is this little guy that wreaked havoc on my gut and many others, but that's where this research started. We then moved this research into all sorts of other GI diseases because it kind of made sense. We moved into diseases like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and started doing some studies to see if by fixing our gut bacteria, could we help treat some of these diseases. And so through the years, like, our manufacturing team went from, okay, well, we can't always be doing colonoscopies on everybody. People don't really like getting colonoscopies, turns out. So we were able to actually learn how to take the microbes and extract them from stool, so there's no stool left in them, and then freeze dry the microbes. And microbes love cold, so as long as you put them in incredibly cold temperatures, they can live decades, if not centuries, hibernating in cold. There's actually an article that came out a few months ago about how some scientists have found some microbes that are about 100 million years old at the bottom of some seafloor, and they were able to wake them up from hibernation, and they woke up. They're 100 million years old. So we store our microbes at a -8 Celsius temperature, and we've done testing on them so far to show that so far we're up to 13 years where they don't die. And we keep looking for this continued data to show that our microbes do stay alive at these cold temperatures. In one of these capsules alone, and actually I can pass a little bag around, which shows what these capsules look like in detail. One capsule alone has 500 billion microbes in it. So in that little bag that's going around, that is 500, they have about, each capsule has about 100 billion. So that dose, so that's the dose that you would take for C. diff. You take 5 capsules. So 500 billion microbes are in just these 5 little capsules, and that's a cure for C. diff. Our capsules have a 98% cure rate for C. difficile infection. So these days, C. diff is it's still killing people, but not nearly at the rate that it used to because we have this cure. Once we showed that it was very safe, effective for this infection, like I said, we moved into other diseases, and then the whole world of medicine decided to open up, and they were very interested, can fixing the gut help other diseases? Our lab at the University of Minnesota is the only academic institution that actually manufactures these products, and so when different researchers are doing clinical trials on different diseases, they actually come to us to buy our capsules to use in their clinical trials. So we collaborate with universities across the entire United States. And a quick little list of the diseases that we are collaborating with are autism, Parkinson's disease, diabetes, food allergies, like I said, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, pulmonary arterial hypertension. There's many cancer studies that are going on using these. I'm trying to think of what else we've done. essentially every single area of medicine is impacted by our gut microbiome. So we know that our gut microbiome, like I said, it's evolved along with us. We know it's an integral part to our immune system. We know it's connected to our metabolism. It's connected to even things like helping regulate body temperature, mood, liver disease, alcoholism. Those are some of the things on the list that are being studied. Other mental health issues like depression, anxiety. It's been pretty fascinating to see how this is changing. So when you go into, there's some scientists that have gone into like very remote areas like the Amazon forest or in other areas in like Africa where there's more indigenous communities that haven't been touched by antibiotics, processed foods, all these things that have actually caused a lot of damage to these microbes throughout our life. And they have species that you don't see in American guts or European guts. They have these ancestral microbes that have been lost along the way. And so we know that it is because of antibiotic usage. It's because even if you're not taking antibiotics yourself, which if you need antibiotics, take them. I'm not going to say don't, but they are going to always cause damage. They're going to kill off some of these healthy microbes that you have in your gut. So the misuse of antibiotics, or a lot of people who will use them for viruses. They should only be used for bacterial infections, but if you use them for a virus, it's a misuse of them. It's going to just damage your microbiome. But sadly, we have even just in our food products, there's antibiotics because we feed antibiotics to our farm animals. And so if we're eating a lot of meat, then we can get trace amounts of antibiotics even through that. And then those farm animals also then go to the bathroom and that waste goes into our water supply. And so there are trace amounts of antibiotics in our water supply. So even if you're not taking antibiotics yourself, you're being exposed to antibiotics in almost everything you're eating or drinking. And so through all of this, we are constantly damaging this very important ecosystem in our gut. So by trying to repair it, it's helping repair disease. So as I said, it's been pretty miraculous. I think some of the most exciting work that I've seen, which will bring tears to my eyes when I hear these stories, is in autism. When this was first being studied, I didn't know, because I've never studied autism, I've never really worked with this disease. So I actually wasn't aware that most kids with autism have a lot of GI problems. They suffer from usually a lot of severe constipation. And it kind of made sense if children can't necessarily relate to their parents or someone else that they're having a lot of gut pain or other problems with their guts and they can't communicate that, their behavior is going to only kind of increase and some of those behavioral symptoms will worsen. So Arizona State University was leading the charge in studying autism and these fecal microbiota transplants, thinking if we can just help with the GI problems, it's one less thing that these kids with autism have to be concerned about. But while they were collecting all this data, of course, they're collecting all this behavioral data as well, and an incidental finding was that the behavioral symptoms were drastically improved. So they continue to get more funding and more grants to keep studying this. And it's to the point now, I actually personally I've worked with about a dozen different families across the US who can't get into these trials at ASU. There's about 3,000 families on the wait list trying to get into those studies because this is the first thing to come along in decades for autism that actually might help. So I work with different families to apply to the FDA directly to get permission to use our capsules for a single patient. And then I work with that patient, their family, and their physician, wherever they are in the country, and get them access to our treatment. And so I get to hear these personal stories. And there are these kids who essentially have been as close to cured of autism as you can possibly get. Nonverbal children who all of a sudden can speak and have language, who have independence, who are taking care of themselves. And so my background in pediatrics mixed now with like this work that I do, the work in autism is some of the most meaningful stuff I do. But I love the fact that, again, this doesn't just stick me to studying just C. diff or just GI issues, that I get to kind of be a part of every single area of medicine by studying our gut microbiome. So I always love coming and talking and telling people stories. So my boss and I mean, people love the story. Doctor-patient turned research team going out and treating all these diseases. And my boss, I mean, he's being taught in textbooks. This is how much he is a pioneer in this research field. He was the first one to really start doing this. So we've been in the BBC, we've been in documentaries, like our story is told over and over and over. So I always like to just kind of share my story whenever I can. So the best advice we give people is, because the first thing I'm usually asked is like, well, what can I do for my microbiome? And I'm just saying fiber, 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 fiber. So we all know, we've always been told, eat your fruits and vegetables, eat, you know, healthy diets, but fiber is so crucial because our microbes in our gut only really feed off of fiber. So everything else that's being digested in our guts actually doesn't always reach the colon. Fiber does. And so our microbes feed off of fiber. And so if you are not getting enough fiber in your diet, you're actually starving those microbes off. And if they're starved long enough, they'll die off and then they're just gone. You can't replace them unless you eat some of our capsules. And so we really just promote high fiber diets and diverse high fiber. Microbes don't want to eat just the same thing. We wouldn't want to eat the same meal every single day. Our microbes want a really diverse diet as well. So the very best thing you can do for your gut, which then is also going to impact everything head to toe in your health, is eating a really high fiber and diverse high fiber diet. We're supposed to get at least 25 to 30 grams of fiber a day, and the average American gets about 4 grams of fiber in their daily diet. So that's how deficient it is. And I tell you, when you start like really focusing on fiber being your key component in your diet, it just becomes really easy. The best advice I give people is find high fiber foods that you love and just increase the abundance of them. Personally for me, like I love hummus, chickpeas, like I'm a hummus addict, you can give me a tub and I will just sit there and dip my vegetables in it, so that way my vegetables have their fiber and my hummus has its fiber. But even things like popcorn, dark chocolate, like things you wouldn't even think of have fiber in them. And so if you start seeking out a lot of foods that you like that have fiber, you can kind of get that increased amount of fiber up in your diet and feed your microbes. So I want to open it up for questions because there's a whole lot that I kind of work on and do, but yeah, I want to just see if anybody has questions.
There seems to be a current trend to include probiotics in food products, particularly in yogurt. Could you comment on that?
Yes, that's the other big question we get is probiotics. So things like yogurt, so yogurt is, we think of more of, similarly to like fermented foods. So fermented foods as well as eat yogurt, because yogurt itself just has live bacteria, the same way as like our capsules. They have live lactobacilli and other like bacteria that are like actually live in them. So yogurt as well as fermented foods are kind of act similarly to fiber. They do reach that part of the colon where the microbes are. Probiotics in and of themselves though, not mixed in any kind of food supplement. There's most of the evidence shows that they're essentially nothing. So I have this big container of microbes sitting here, and these are actually manufactured capsules that did have live microbes. There's probably some still alive since there's 100 billion in each capsule, but they die off at room temperature. So if you think about that, when I talked about how they need to stay cold to hibernate and to stay alive, a probiotic that's sitting on a shelf in a store that's been sitting there for months, we've done the testing on microbes, those are all dead microbes. You're just swallowing an empty capsule. So, and actually research has proven that 99% of probiotics on the market have dead microbes. There's nothing alive in there. So it's not as if it will harm you, but it's gonna just be a waste of money. You're literally just swallowing capsules. So the only probiotics that potentially could be very legit would have to be refrigerated or frozen, because otherwise the microbes just can't stay alive. There's a really wonderful research team in Israel that has done the most research on probiotics in the world, and they were the ones to actually prove and show that probiotics, at least in the US, because they're supplements, they're not regulated, so they don't even have to prove to anyone that what's in their product is actually true. So when they claim that they have, 1 billion microbes in their probiotics, like I said, no one's checking on that, and if it's stored at room temperature, those microbes are dead. If you get a real probiotic, it does actually help your gut. But you also have to think about it, it's only gonna be a few species. So again, I think of like that rainforest analogy, and if you have all this damage done to your rainforest and you're trying to fix it, and say there are 100 species that are extinct, and you're trying to fix your rainforest, but you only reintroduce like 2 or 3 species. It'll help a little bit, but it's not going to fix like that massive damage. So sadly, I mean, one unfortunate thing is when some of those microbes are completely eliminated, they have gone extinct. As I said, it's almost impossible to reintroduce them unless you're exposed to them through your food, through your diet, or through kind of a transplant mechanism. So most probiotics, not really what they are, but if they are one that's cold, you have a much better chance of actually getting it.
Are you still getting your product from human donations?
Yep.
Okay, so there's no way to produce this in a lab?
No, and there are definitely pharmaceutical companies that are trying to do this synthetically, because with patent laws, you can't patent biological life in its natural form. So the FDA considers this a drug, which was still very strange to me that human stool is a drug, but they consider it a drug. And because of that, of course, yeah, pharmaceutical companies want to be able to profit off this. There actually are 2 FDA-approved products for just treating C. diff. They had to modify that though, so it's not just in its natural form. As my boss would say, nature did it best. When you start messing with nature, like, it just isn't the same. I guarantee you there will be synthetic forms made down the road, but to try to actually recreate, I mean, think about trying to recreate like a rainforest again from scratch synthetically. It's just not, it's not easy, and it's not very, it's not going to function kind of the same. And at this point, we don't even know all the microbes, so we're still identifying them. So we don't even know what they all are yet, let alone like what their functionality is. And so that research will be continuing. And I think one day we'll get to a point where we have some more synthetically made ones, but right now, yeah, nature did it best.
And for those who are now receiving this form of treatment versus your form of treatment, are they seeing the results as quickly as you did?
Absolutely. Yep.
This is really close to me because there's a number of foods I cannot eat, and as soon as I do, I have the process. Is this a form of that also? I just know I can't eat these things, and therefore I don't. But there's a number of foods that I can. But I mean, it's so intriguing when you're talking about this. And then I'm lucky enough not to have all foods do it to me, but it's just a great weight loss program.
Yeah, and we, and so there is a study at Emory University right now that's looking at whether these transplants can reverse food allergies. So obviously there's kind of food intolerances, which you're kind of talking about, and then food allergies. And there's enough evidence to show that this is reversing food allergies and food intolerances in people. Because again, when you're getting these microbes from people who don't have those problems. So I've done, besides my first transplant, I've actually taken our capsules a few other times. Because I had this very severe C. diff infection, anytime I go on antibiotics, I'm at a much higher risk of getting C. diff infection than the average person. So for the rest of my life, I will always be at this high risk of getting C. diff again. So thankfully I have this cure right in my freezers at work. And so I've done the capsules after I've gone on extensive antibiotic treatments to protect myself. And every time I've gotten treatment from 3 different donors, so 3 different stool donors, and each time I take them, it's always interesting because my food cravings change. I have a huge sweet tooth, and so one of my donors completely wiped my sweet tooth away, and I didn't want sweets for months and months and months. And so, and we've had a lot of patients say, I couldn't eat all these foods, and then they get C. diff, they go on their transplant, and all of a sudden they can eat all these foods again. So there is the potential that this could reverse like food intolerances,
give you
allergies.
any options other than don't eat them.
Yep. So yeah, it's all about fixing the gut.
Amazing.
Well, everybody, please give Amanda a